Hi. Thank you for kicking around until the end. Appreciated. Hi. I guess the best place to start is an introduction. That's me. I'm Cassie, and as my website says, I like making fun, interactive things with code. I also talk and write about those things. This is a bit outdated, actually. I now work for an animation library called GSAP, and I spend 99% of my time helping other people make fun, interactive stuff with code and not actually making anything fun myself at all. But back in the day, I made lots of stuff like this. And this talk kind of came about because I was speaking at a lot of conferences and I was doing a lot of workshops. And I started getting this question constantly. What animation library did you use for that? Usually pointing at something that I had made. Or what animation library should I learn? And it depends. Call back. But also, it's not really the right question. What people usually meant when they were asking that is, how do I do that thing? And the answer in most cases was actually not about the animation library that I was using. It depends. You could kind of use CSS, or you could use GSAP, or you could use anime, you could use all sorts of things. But the kind of thing underneath all of it was SVG. And I started realizing that people didn't really have a massive understanding of what you can actually do with SVG. Like, there's loads of talks and loads of articles about like what we can do with CSS nowadays and what we can do with the latest JavaScript framework, but not so much for SVG. And my SVG animation workshops even, people are usually a bit frustrated by like 3/4 of the way through, because I haven't even touched on any animation stuff. We've just been like learning all about SVG. And then right at the very end, we'll sprinkle in a little bit of animation, and it kind of brings all the stuff that people have learnt to life. So we got mostly devs in this room. Is it mostly like front-end devs? Who's front-end dev? Got any designers? Yeah, awesome. Welcome. So yeah, I was a designer before I got into dev, and yeah, so this talk should hopefully be helpful. So when people think about SVG, what springs to mind? Like, what do you think in terms of use cases? You can just shout use cases out at me. Vectors. Good. Icons. Yeah, there we go. Art. Very highbrow. What we used to do with Flash. Those are all very valid. So yeah, I was guessing there'd be things along these lines, like animation and graphics and vectors and illustrations. Icons is like what the majority of devs think about when they think about SVG. Like, usually they've just kind of plonked a load of SVG code into a file somewhere in their code base, and then they never look at it ever again. They're just like, that's all terrifying, and I don't want to look at it. So SVG is great for all of these things, and if anyone doesn't know what it is, it stands for Scalable Vector Graphics. And speaking very broadly, most people, they come across SVG when the designer will make something in a vector graphics program like Illustrator or like Affinity Designer, and then they'll pass the assets over to a developer. As I said, like, you kind of take that number garbage and you shove it in a file and you never look at it again. Sarah Drasner referred to it as number garbage, by the way, and I stole that. It's like number rubbish for UK people. But yeah, the main reason that I really love SVG is because of this kind of overlap between design and dev. SVG is both a graphics format and it's a markup language, a declarative markup language, to call back to Jeremy's talk. So we've got a little bit of code here. It's making a rectangle. We've got a very unexciting white rectangle underneath it. My friend Richard, he did a talk and he described SVG in it as being an alternate universe version of HTML focused on graphics instead of documents, which was better than any of my descriptions of SVG, and I've been doing talks and workshops for ages, so I've just stolen it. But I really love that. I could let it sink in, like a markup language for graphics. And this was like small me back when I started learning how to code. And I just was coming completely from a design headspace, and I was trying to learn JavaScript for the first time. And all the tutorials I was doing were, you know, print this thing out to the console and like turn this array into a different array. And I was like, why? What? But like, why? I don't understand how this maps over to like real life stuff. And then I found out that you could take an SVG that you had made in a graphics editor and then take the code and then move it around with JavaScript. And I was suddenly like, oh, okay, that makes sense to me. So I started messing about with SVGs. I made this little wobbly jellyfish dude. This is using CSS animations and SVG filters. And then as I kind of got more like used to JavaScript, I started messing around with like different web APIs and libraries and stuff. So this is taking the average color from a webcam feed and then changing the color of the little chameleon. And this ended up getting used in a coding workshop for kids, which was really lovely. So yeah, this is a little dancing blob, and it gets shy. If it sees your face in the webcam, it stops dancing. Which, when I was learning how to code, I was like, yeah, this was actually kind of keeping me hooked and keeping me learning. And I thought that a lot of this stuff was kind of a bit pointless when I was learning. It's fun, but it's not kind of the thing that you see every day on the web. But I kind of started noticing like really clever little uses of SVG popping up all over the place. And there's kind of fun stuff like this. This was actually on the CSS Tricks website, which is wonderful. It gave me like a joy aneurysm when I saw it. I was just like, God. And I feel like for like nowadays, the web, there's so many like templates and everything. Like the digital world can feel a little less human than it used to. Like back in the days of Myspace, like the websites were crap, but they felt human. Like it felt like a human had actually made them. And I really love seeing this kind of thing pop up on the web nowadays, because it's just a little callback. Well, this was just me putting in another example. It's just super cute. But this isn't really what the majority of people are building like day to day on websites, sadly. And I think that this is why learning SVG is kind of, oh, 1 second. There we go. Like deprioritized by a lot of developers. Another reason I think it's deprioritized is because it's declarative and people think it's not clever, so they want to focus on learning JavaScript. But anyway, so they deprioritize it because it's kind of for whimsical graphics and animations. And people are like, I'm a developer, I'm not a designer, I don't need to learn that. And what most of us deal with day to day for the majority of websites, no matter what framework or whatever you're kind of getting this stuff out of, it's HTML and CSS and JavaScript. So everyone seems to be quite like comfortable with these things. And yeah, but we also have SVG over here, little SVG down in the bottom. And most people are like still just using it for icon sets. They're like, yeah, the SVG stuff's icons. And I think that we should all spend a little bit more time like understanding what SVG itself can actually do, and we can unlock a whole world of styling possibilities. I don't know why I did that. Oh, that was just me being like, SVG is important, it should be over here and bigger. I didn't put any notes in that slide. So yeah, important and should be bigger. A lot of the cool features that we have today in CSS are actually kind of imported from SVG. So masking and clipping, they've been part of SVG since like early 2000s. CSS filters as well, they're like a small simplified subset of what we've got in SVG. We also have patterns and filters and gradients and clipping and paths, masking, all sorts of things, loads of stuff to play with. And it's also not purely presentational. So SVG's, as I said, it's a structural markup language, just like HTML. So we've got stuff like image and foreign object. So we can have external content referenced from inside an SVG. Lots of ramblings was just me being like, wow, it's so exciting. SVG can also be traversed by screen readers because it has a DOM. And that's really exciting coming from the creative dev world because to throw back to doing the stuff in Flash, we've kind of got a resurgence of new developers nowadays who are just making loads of stuff with Canvas and WebGL and 3JS. And it's kind of basically the same as in the Flash days where you had a kind of canvas element that was not, interactive at all unless you could see it visually. Whereas SVG, you can do fun graphical animated things, but you can also access it with screen readers. So it's great for like graphs and that kind of thing. Not sure what the transition was between those slides. It's a lot to take in. Anyway, so there's an article that Chris Coyer wrote. Probably quite a while now. Wow, 2018. It's like in the pre-bad days. So it was a really great article. It was called Your Brain on Front-End Development. I don't know if I can scroll down. I did this talk for an online talk and I was sitting at my computer so I could just scroll and things. There we go. So in this article, he kind of breaks down how he feels when he looks at a website, how he kind of breaks all of the things down and works out like maybe that bit's Flexbox and maybe that bit's grid and maybe I would use filters for this thing. So we're going to kind of do the same thing now, but with our SVG hat on. This is just an owl. I felt like he deserved an owl. It's been a long day. So we'll start with something small. This is a little tooltip. So if we were approaching this without our SVG hat on, we might try and make a little div and make a triangle with CSS. Who's made a triangle with CSS before? It sucks. I have to Google it every time. It makes no sense. It's something to do with width and height being 0, and then when borders intersect, they make a triangle. So you just, I don't know, you just copy paste that snippet. And that's like, it makes sense because HTML is made for information and SVG is made for graphics. So if we were to look at this with SVG, we'd have a view box, which is basically our bit of grid paper. And then this is saying, hey, SVG, make me a little bit of grid paper that's 100 by 100, and then we're going to draw some stuff on it. Now, I know that you were promised magic, and I'm basically just showing you a triangle. It's not hugely exciting, but still, like, you have points, and you just plot them out on a little grid, and then you have a responsive shape. So I think that's pretty exciting. And that means that we can use SVG to plot anything we want onto a responsive grid. So for stuff like this kind of thing, I mean, we've got grid and we've got Flexbox and stuff now, but layouts are still a little bit tricky. This kind of thing in SVG is really nice and simple because you've got a responsive grid that you can plot stuff onto. So we can just kind of draw out some squares and rectangles like that. And then you can pop some images in them. And we have the same as you have background size cover and contain in CSS. In SVG land, you've got preserve aspect ratio, which controls how images scale. And that's a thing that a lot of people don't realize you can do. So here we go. So yes, image grid like this. This is a little bit more complicated. This is puppy. So we've got a bunch of shapes, which we know SVG can do really well. And then we've got an image which is clipped in the large shape in the middle. And we can do that using clip path in SVG. So hooray! And you can do clipping in CSS now as well. So you can actually use SVG paths in CSS. There's like the path attribute. But there's better browser support for doing clipping just in SVG. And also, magic. The other reason I like using SVG for graphics is that you can really easily swap out CSS variables, and then you can do theming. And if you'd done this kind of thing with like a PNG that you exported out, you wouldn't be able to do that. So yeah, you can have graphics that are kind of interactive and change along with theming, which is cool. And also, SVG, you can do animations. So we can also animate stuff. I'll do that again. Boop. You can animate stuff inside an SVG clip path as well. So you just grab the element inside the clip path and you can whiz it around and do stuff with it. More animating stuff in a clip path. So yeah, this is animating this little path here, this little wobbly path. And then it's showing and hiding the image. So I think this is what I was kind of talking about when people are like, how do you do that? What animation library do you use? And it's actually, all it's doing animation-wise is just moving an element up and to the left, but it's using cool stuff that you have inside SVG. So you could do that with CSS or GSAP or whatever you wanted. Clipping in CSS. So clipping in CSS, you can do lots of straight shapes, but SVG paths allow you to do curves. So if we were doing something like this, when I see this kind of thing, I'm immediately like, okay, cool, that's going to need SVG. And you might be thinking, okay, that's all well and good, but that's a whole bunch of images, and I don't want to put every single image inside an SVG in the markup, because that would be a pain in the bum. But you can apply SVG clips to HTML elements too. So you can reference clip paths by ID, by a URL, and then you can use the same SVG for all of them. Oh, yeah, there's one issue here, which is that in CSS, clip paths need a unit range from 0 to 1. And then when you've got an SVG, your unit range is based on the view box. So it's not going from 0 to 1. You could change that by drawing out all of your SVGs on a 0 to 1 view box, but that's a little bit unhinged. So you can get around this by doing a little bit of maths. It's not too much maths, that's fine. So you get your view box, and then you do a little scale transform on your clip path, like that. And then it gets all of your SVG elements into the right range. And then you can just pop that little bit of SVG code in the bottom of your website somewhere hidden, and then you can just use it on anything that you like. So you can kind of create a little reusable clip path, which is quite fun. Also, you get to do a little bit of maths, and it makes you feel clever.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Could you use a calc in there now? Or
Could
CSS calc to do that for you?
Oh, you might be able to. In there. Not sure. It's in an attribute. Unsure. Let's try it. We'll try it after this. So yes, this is just me showing that you can do this. Wonderful. Handles all the scaling auto-magically. And also you can use SVG curves to, SVG paths to do gentle curves like this. So this is kind of like how all the Apple icons are. This is George's pen. Shout out to George. And it makes shapes feel a little bit more organic. What did you call this shape, George?
Squircles.
Yes, squircles. squarish circles. And yeah, there's loads of, I mean, this is maybe a little out of date now in terms of design, but like these little waves were all the rage for ages. And that's just shouting out for SVG clipping and masking. Can I get over to this? Let me go over to the other screen. There we go. Yeah, this website's great. You can create little waves. Like, woo! Nope. There we go. Little waves. Wonderful. And then, excitingly, you can also animate them as well. So come back over here. Yeah, I made some blobby waves. So because you can get into SVG path data and you can animate like bits of SVG path data, you can create waves like that on websites like that and then make some blobs. I don't know why you would actually want to, but you can. That's fun. And then you wouldn't be able to do that without an understanding of SVG as well. So you could know all of the stuff about animation libraries, but unless you understand SVG path data, you're not going to really get anywhere. I actually use this on a real site. I like making silly nonsense like that and then toning it down very slightly and just like managing to squish it into client projects. Done a lot of rambling. Oh, this is a cute little button. It's just nice little stuff like that. It can be like a nice little addition to UI animations. And we can also do this, I think, in Chrome now. Couldn't do it when I first did this talk, but sorry. Let's have a little look. Yeah, awesome. So that's happening in Chrome, and that's what I was referencing. We can use SVG path data in CSS now, which is super cool. Whee! SVG moves really slowly, so it's like you kind of find stuff in the spec and you're like, wow, this is great, when is this coming? And it's like, the spec was like 2009. It's like still incoming. But this is moved relatively quickly for SVG. I think because the CSS working group are in charge of it, maybe. I think I was just putting loads of fun pens in. This one's cute. I don't think you could get that into a client site. This kind of stuff as well. So SVG paths are really fun. You can use SVG paths, can animate them in to create these kind of like drawn in effects. Is it going to work? Oh, there we go. Yeah, it's like a little background line that animates down the page. Stroke animation is like one of my favorite kind of SVG hacks. So in order to do stroke animation, we have to have a stroke, like a stroked line, and then you create a dash with like little offsets on it. Sorry, I keep losing my cursor. And then once you've got that, you can animate the dash along the line. This looks like little bugs. It's quite cute. But if we... If you make the dash the same length as the line, then you can have these lines that animate in. And you can't do variable width strokes in SVG. It's always got like the same width. But we can mix up SVG stroke animation and clip paths and then create clipped shapes over the strokes, and then you can have variable width strokes like that. Don't know what the dots were. Oh, patterns, SVG patterns. So there's another thing that's very cool. So you can do patterns in SVG. So this, we've got a pattern element here, and then we've got a circle inside the pattern element. And then you can just repeat that and use it as a fill. So yeah, SVG patterns were great. When I started putting this talk together, I think I spent about 90% of the time prepping this talk just playing with SVG patterns and completely forgot that I was meant to be writing a talk. So here's some patterns I made. I don't really have any more information on them other than shiny. So you can do that. You can also do stuff like this. I was like, I wonder whether you can animate stuff inside an SVG pattern. Yes, you can. I, again, don't know why you would want to do that, but you can. So this is an SVG stroke animation inside an SVG pattern. Yeah, I genuinely have yet to find a real world use case for this. If you want to hire me to put this on your website, that'd be great. But yeah, SVG patterns are also quite cool for, you know, just adding a little bit of texture to the background of websites. Filters. SVG filters are also super cool. So as I said, we have filters in CSS, but it's like a small subset of filters that we have in SVG. And basically with SVG filters, you have access to the filter primitives and you can kind of combine them in an infinite number of ways to create whatever you can think of. If you've done like audio processing before, maybe it's a little bit like hooking up modular synthesizers. Like rather than piping audio data through things, you're piping pixel data through things, and you just kind of pipe all of that through these SVG filters, and then you can create all sorts of things. This website was actually, I found this, and it's really, really useful because you can kind of pull different nodes together. So you can choose different little filter primitives and kind of mess around with them. And then you can do, yeah, duotone, more dogs. Duotone stuff like this, which is nice that you can do this kind of thing in code rather than having to treat images and then upload images and then change them if the styling of the website changes or whatever. And we can do filters applied to HTML elements as well. Where's my cursor? This is very cool. Look at that. And this is really clever. This is basically blurring these elements and then upping the contrast so that you can see these kind of shapes in between them. Blobs. We like blobs. Come back. Yeah, and also applying SVG filters to text. So this is just normal text, and then it's got an SVG filter where I've made a kind of drop shadow effect on it. And that's great because the text is all jazzy, but it's also still accessible. Yay, accessibility. On that note, I think this is my last thing. Oh no, this is more rambling. Oh, no, it is. This is my last thing. Okay, so yeah, another thing I see a lot on sites like this, whenever I see like a data viz site, I'm always like very excited. It's like beautiful design, very excited about it. And then inevitably you'll go look at the assets and it will just be a whole load of PNGs. And I'm like, but all your data is inaccessible now, and that's so sad. And yeah, I think with SVG itself, like the coolest thing is that you can put titles and description tags. You can also tell tell the screen reader to traverse the whole SVG by putting role equals group on it. And then you're saying like, go right inside all the gubbins. I've put loads of information in there for you. And then you can put all sorts of things like text elements and they'll get read out, but you can also use foreign object tags and you can put HTML inside your SVG. So you can get a bit meta with it. Let's have a little look at this.
Foreign object in SVG. Infographic, an important infographic. Group. This is some very important graph info. Heading 1. It's actually HTML inside an SVG. You can access this information with a screen reader because SVG is hella cool. This is a glorious tabbable button element. Button.
So yeah, I just think SVG has so much potential that people don't really know about. And just by knowing a few of these little things, like hopefully when you're looking at designs or kind of figuring out how you're going to build something, you'll go, oh, there's that thing in SVG land. Maybe that's something that I could use. I hope this was helpful. And thank you for having me, and enjoy your pizza. Hooray!